SATSANG 1. AYOUN. Malaga. July 1, 2019. Well, who wants to start asking a question, or testifying, or saying what they want? Brother, I'm willing to give a testimony. So don't move, I'm moving. It makes me move. So, Pascal, let's hear it. Brother, actually, I would like to talk about detachment. Yes, go ahead. In relation to children, our children are not our children. Yes. And so, I will take the example of what I experienced with my daughters. With pleasure. We're looking at this. And so, well, in fact, with regard to my daughters, in fact, I was not the ideal father that they would have hoped for. And so when I did, life forced me to leave my wife and children. So it was quite difficult for my daughters, my ex, the mother of my children, and myself, of course. And after a while, in fact, the relationship got worse and I tried to pick up the pieces, but I could see that I couldn't do it. So, one day, I thought to myself that there's no point in seeking my daughter's love because it can only come from them. And so, I wrote a letter to tell them that I would probably do things and then that I would no longer bother them. However, I was available at any time if they wanted to see me. So I completely let go and just told them it could only come from them, that's all. And so, now, I feel much freer about it, and well, they know that they are in my heart and that they can come. Has their behavior, compared to you, changed or not yet? Well, no, because it's recent. Because it's recent. They need time. So, here it is. So I wanted to say that in fact it completely liberated me, and it's not indifference, as you've already mentioned several times, but it's just giving them the opportunity to come to me when they want to. Wherever they wish. That's it. Well, when you see that everything resists and everything opposes in a more conflictual relationship, in divorce cases, you have no way of acting as a man. I have also experienced the same thing with children I have raised. You have to give them time and they come back later. Because of course, everyone knows that in divorces, there is what dad says, what mom says. And in general, children are forced to believe the mother, especially when the father is no longer there. It's easy. And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's a great ordeal because it teaches detachment and also it gives freedom, and those who have to live that, precisely, it's because they tended, perhaps, to have too much attachment in relation to their relation, let's say. And that's the only way. Anyway, you have no way of acting in situations like this. As long as you oppose it, you're the bad guy. As they say, you have to give time. And in this kind of relationship, of divorce, where indeed there is always one of the two parents who is harmed, whether we like it or not, we must really give the children time. This is what they had to live to understand love, and not only what we tell them. Because it is obvious that for a mother, or if it is a father who is in charge, it is very easy to break the other person through conduits, sentences that are a little suggested, we will say. The child is obliged, he cannot do otherwise until I would say almost, not 14, but almost in his 20s, to accept what one of the two parents says to the detriment of the other. He has no choice. Because without it, he's putting himself on the line, and he's even worse. So indeed, it is a great lesson, even if it is hard, to learn this notion of forced detachment from the flesh of one's own flesh in certain circumstances, which makes it possible, as you actually say, to regain freedom, knowing that from a linear perspective, a child who has been, to whom one has finally led to in relation to the other parent who is not there, the balance is always restored. But this is not done, unfortunately, in childhood but in adulthood. But that's the way it is. It is a great lesson, both for the father, for the children, and for the woman. And when this kind of situation occurs, and which is terribly frequent, there is no choice but to let go, as you say, that is, and it will teach you detachment. It does not take anything away from love. You realize that love in front of, even what is called a child or a parent, is always there. And that even if there is no emotional relationship, even if the child or one of the parents completely cuts the relationship off, it cannot be forgotten. But that it requires a form of lesson and learning that effectively resolves itself, but you have to give it time. the age of reason, as they say, or the age of understanding, which I greatly prefer, a child cannot have it, because he or she has to believe what one of the parents says. And it would avoid a lot of problems, if one of the two parents would accept that. In general, it is the one who has custody who is believed, sometimes it is the other way around, so it is dramatic to live with, but there is nothing you can do about it. That is, if this happens in your life with your children, with your spouse, with anyone, with your parent, you can only accept today, and it is for everyone the opportunity to verify precisely what detachment and freedom from love is. Because as long as there is a need to affirm a position, to restore, in quotation marks, a paternal, maternal or filial bond, there is necessarily resistance. And the child can't do otherwise. The child must understand it through his or her experience, and over time, there is reparation. It is a bad term, but there is compensation that occurs, and there is recognition of the child. It's something that's constant. If you have a situation where there is a conflict or a loss of love, in quotation marks, with a child or a parent, it is important to understand that it involves this feeling of loss, to resolve precisely what was present in both of them, that is, an attachment. Subsidiary attachment, you know that it is attachment for a mother. It is very, very hard to untie this bond of the flesh, this so-called maternal bond, because it is simply inscribed in our genes, and it is especially inscribed in confinement. The flesh, the transmission by the flesh, exists only in the enclosed worlds. You even have people on Earth, and even today, for example, in Africa, children are not raised by parents, especially not today. They are entrusted to aunts, grandmothers and grandfathers, so that there may be a certain freedom with regard to the flesh and with regard to the obligation, in brackets, to love father and mother with the same intensity. Society systematically takes us to this. And even what is happening in the simulacra, that is to say that today you are told, not in the sense of Khalil Gibran, your children are not your children, but you are told, the children do not belong to the parents, but belong to the state, to the republic, which is a falsification. Of course, even through this simulacrum and falsification, you have precisely the opportunity to discover true freedom and free love, that is, that love which is not conditioned by the flesh even with its own children or its own parents. And this is how you most obviously solve the conflicts that exist between siblings, especially between parents/children or children/parents. This is where one of the major roots of attachment lies, I would say, obviously, through the educational model, at least in the West, because you have seen that in Africa, there are many countries in Africa, it is not at all like that. Since as soon as the children are born, they are entrusted to an aunt, an uncle, one of the grandparents, which makes it possible to lighten the bond of the flesh and transcend it somewhere, even if it is hard. Moreover, in humanity in the making, I believe, at that time the intraterrestrial peoples expressed well that children were not their children. In Atlantis, for example, souls were born in the first Atlantis. In any case, souls were born conscious of who they were with a past life. There could be no attachment. Today, you have a child, systematically, you take as a child people you have killed in a past life. That is a fundamental karmic law. When you have a child, there is necessarily the father or mother who killed the child in a past life. But the reparation of karma, in quotation marks, according to the akontic laws, it is not because you have sinned that you will suffer sin. It works exactly backwards. That is to say, from the moment there has been an offense against life, murder, there are other situations even more unpleasant than murder because at least there you die, you're at peace. For example, what is called rape, situations of rape, on the level of the person, we are talking about the person, are always translated for the rapist in the future life by an epilepsy, always, because there is an amazement of the consciousness that you have induced. While murder, in quotation marks, represents nothing compared to karmic laws. This does not mean that people have to be killed, but in terms of the consequences, they are not the same. The laws of confinement do not work at all as we believe. As the Westerners believed, well, it is true that 25 years ago, regressions, karma, all that, and even Tibetans in original Buddhism, in Vajrayana, arrived in France, tell us that only the Westerner who is sufficiently crazy to believe that he will pay for all the actions he has created in one way or another. It doesn't work that way. And besides, it works exactly the other way round. A long time ago, I did thousands of regressions on patients, and I was very interested in this child-parent relationship. A child will always choose one of the parents who has hurt him in a past life. It is a way of repairing, that is, he will not make that person who hurt him pay by saying, well, you'll suffer, but in the very difficult relationship, there is the possibility of reparation. These were the laws of duality, the law of karma, the law of AYOUN. But nevertheless, there were still agreements that were quoted, that were written between the different aspects of the confining, free, supraconsciousness, dimension, etc. To allow if you want it to be, in quotation marks, livable. You can imagine that if a child had the memory that his or her father or mother killed him or her in a past life, it would be extremely difficult to live with. Yeah, what do you mean? Well, actually, I don't need to do any regressions. I got the pictures of the bond between my daughters. Yes. It's constant. What I'm telling you is a rule. So, here it is. I killed. I had a dagger, yes. And then both. So that's it. And the karmic relationship, that is, the bond of the flesh, is induced by DNA directly, and by AYOUN. In the so-called free worlds, there is no such thing. In the very worlds of unified 3D, for example, the Arcturians, who are scientists and fighters, love to kill each other, but for them it's a game like when you're a kid, Pem. You are dead. It doesn't matter, they don't have any interruption of consciousness and are not locked up and they resynthesize a body right away. So, according to the worlds, either they resynthesize a body immediately, or it passes, and not all peoples pass, from unified 3D, not through gestation. That is, there is no woman who carries a child in her womb. Believing that the notion of family exists up there doesn't mean anything. And yet when you are born, you have known families. And every time we do it again, because there is forgetting, by establishing links that contribute to the confinement, even the most harmonious links. Indeed, even before talking about absolute, supraconsciousness and so on, 20, 30 years ago when we were working on karma, on regressions, on all that, we realized that it was constant. That is, the biggest karmic problem we have to solve, in quotation marks as a person, I'm not talking about the absolute, is related to our own children. Even if the relationship is very harmonious. Good, if it is harmonious, there is a liberation, but nevertheless, it is both a challenge for freedom and at the same time a mark of confinement. Because DNA is obviously fine, as Christ said, it goes on for 7 generations, a curse will follow 7 generations and much more. But that makes perfect sense. We are all carriers of Mary's DNA, we are all carriers of DNA with different configurations. And we know for a fact that these memories are not elsewhere than in DNA. So it is all very well to talk, for example, about the causal chakra which is linked to the causal body, or karma which is linked to the second chakra, where there is any karmic coding of everything we have done. But even without going through the chakras, through energy or through consciousness, it is written directly into the DNA. You have to know that DNA is not at all something that is frozen, unlike what you, even at school when you talked about DNA, even in high school, and even what you believed in science 20 years ago that DNA, well, you have it since birth and it doesn't change, that it's not possible, you know today, that it's not true. DNA is modified by thoughts, by the way we speak and by what is called epigenetics, that is, the environment. A simple colored piece in which you live will modify your DNA. We now know that Darwin's theories of evolution are completely false. Because DNA is something plastic like the brain and not at all something frozen that you have at birth and that stays that way until death. In other words, we know that listening to music, well, we had already seen it at Klingon Energy, you listen to hard rock, metal even if you like it, your radiance is the radiance of a psychotic at Klingon level. You listen to Mozart, even if you hate Mozart, your radiance harmonizes. We make it even louder, we put on aviation headphones so that people wouldn't hear the music through their ears and the effect is the same. That is, the cell picks up the music. And it doesn't go through the senses. it goes directly to the level, their vibratory, energetic, and the musical frequencies. For example, the Japanese found that Mozart grows hair. And it's independent of your tastes. That is, if you listen to destructive music, which hits the bass on the second chakra, even if you don't feel the energies, you have effects on the DNA. And that has been demonstrated, but in a very, very simple way. So, of course, our thoughts act on DNA, but in the parent-slash-child relationships to come to that, so the filial bond that is written in DNA can be resolved on one side or the other. He doesn't have to have a match between the child and the parent for it to be resolved. It is enough that there is one of them doing the work, in quotation marks, for the relationship to be resolved. That is to say, the attachment, this filial bond, which is nevertheless so important for the human being. I guarantee you, when you're up there, even without talking about the absolute or in other worlds, the notion father, mother, child, family means absolutely nothing. So at the time it was funny, because you have brothers and sisters, but yes, well, I find my children, my parents who are dead. That's astral, it has nothing to do with the truth. Remember that until recently, even people who had visions, who came out of their bodies in the astral body, or even in the body of eternity, could not have access to the truth. You have fantastic books that have been written, if I think, for example, of the Swiss author, Albert Patchard, who tells us about his afterlife. His afterlife takes place in the astral. It does not happen in the truth, since no one could live the truth, even when you died. Even the NDE testimonies, if you will, because we've investigated them a lot, even people who are experiencing imminent death, without going as far as sunlight, because they're stopped by family members or white lighters, we know that these white lighters who stop you are just a pipe dream, they don't exist. They are holograms, they are projections of the acontic matrix. There is no savior, there is no Christ. Moreover, a Muslim who makes an NDE, he goes to see Allah. A Buddhist who makes an NDE, he goes to see Buddha. A Hindu who believes in Kalki and who worships Kalki, goes to Kalki when he does an NDE. A Christian who worships Christ, goes to see Christ. So you can see that this is a problem that has nothing to do with the truth. It is really linked to the conditioning that you impose on yourself through thought, experience and habit, as we have said about form, the habit of matter. But that none of this exists. And everything is done, of course, to make us believe that we are tied by these famous ties of the flesh. But in the spirit there is no flesh, there are no bonds that hold. So, of course, when you access the truth, you can no longer be fooled by all this. It doesn't mean you love your children less, but the relationship is much freer. That is to say, it is not underpinned. You owe me respect, or you owe me love because I am your father, etc. etc. That is bullshit. There is no such thing. It is an acontic invention that was linked to confinement. But in the truth, there is no place for that. What Nisargadatta says, he had children, he was married, when his wife died, he was dancing around the bed. He was not fooled. And I've always said, by the way, that when someone dies, I'm happy for him. Especially now, because he's free. Sister, I have lived through this. I can't feel any pain even for a loved one. That's impossible. Sorrow is linked to attachment and lack. Now why do you miss the other one? Because you think you are separated from him. Especially if it's your father or mother. When my father died, I had no suffering, no pain, no lack, on the contrary. Moreover, in addition, he manifested himself to Louise, to me, to my son. He was wonderfully well. While still in the astral, because, when he died, there was no access to the light. So, we could see him, he was dressed in a blue cloak, Mary's cloak, while it was still astral. And we always see them as if by chance much younger, much more, very well dressed. This is all bullshit. There is no such thing. It is still a mechanism, as we said this morning, of projection, a projective mechanism of consciousness. Without it, the NDES, for example, people who are experiencing near death, they would all see the same thing. Why do you see as a function of your beliefs? Think about it. These are just projections. Nevertheless, all people who live in NDE, even without going to the light, in any case are free from the fear of death, because they saw that they existed outside this body. That said, you have brothers and sisters who have lived NDEs, and there are not some in this room, but here, who are always afraid of death. Why? Why? We never understood that. Because they have, until now we know that the NDEs, the people who live the aspiration in the tunnel and who meet family members or a white lighter who are fraud, when they come back, they no longer have the fear of death. Except in a few cases, without having had what is called a negative near-death experience. There are still 10% of people who make NDEs, a negative near-death experience. That is, they come back terrified. These guys, then they try to forget their experience. But you do have, indeed, 10 to 15% of the brothers and sisters who are living a near-death experience, who have lit that they are not this body, who have met the pseudo-beings of light and who are coming back and being terrorized by death. Because there is an attachment to form, so it is a problem of consciousness that is phenomenal. And that's what we were talking about this morning, about the notion of consciousness linked to a form or a framework. As long as you're in consciousness, you are not free, whatever the consciousness. Because consciousness will always let you into projective phenomena that have nothing to do with the mind, this time, but that come close to it somewhere. Because it takes you into beliefs, into illusions. So, yes, our children are not our children, and it is specific to this world. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So believing that you will find father/mother/children on the other side is not true. There is no such thing. All this is a fraud that the icons created by the reflection grids, by the enclosed matrix. But we already had proof, a long time ago, when we investigated these near-death experiences in the AYOUN France and United States Association. We realized that there were 5–7% of the people who crossed these so-called white lighters, or family members, to reach the light, and crossed the light on the other side. These, when they came back, they were totally free. There were no words, absolute or eternal I, but these did not have the same behavior at all. Now which of those who have succeeded precisely in going to the extreme stage of the NDE, that is, to cross these pseudo-beings of light in the tunnel that draws you towards the light to go into the light, that they call the sun, indeed, and cross the sun? They are people who used to find their way around in space, that is, aircraft pilots, helicopter pilots, Formula One pilots, people who had a command of visual space. Those who had a mastery of visual space, systematically, they made complete near-death experiences. That is, they were not stopped by the so-called family members who welcome you and tell you, but no, you see, you have to go back, you didn't do your job. Or worse, Christ or Buddha telling them no, you have to go back. That's a complete fraud. It's astral, it's completely astralized. It has nothing to do with the truth. And yet, it is enough for many brothers or sisters who have experienced this, to no longer be afraid of death, to no longer be afraid. But nevertheless, they are not free. Only those who have gone to the other side of the light, that is, who have crossed these pseudo-beings of light, who have gone to the end of the tunnel, who have crossed the sun and found themselves at the extinction of consciousness, are free to return. Of course, they have not gone through all the energetic, vibratory or conscious stages, but when they come back, they are totally different from the other experimenters, we will say, because they have lit the truth. While all those who are arrested, by white lighters or family members, only encounter ghosts. They do not exist. Besides, the difference is very simple. When you see an astral being, I don't speak in this body, but when you travel, in quotation marks, when you go out in naked consciousness, or in the body of eternity, the difference between a light being and a false one, it is fundamental. A being of light, light is inside the form whatever the form. What is astral that belongs to falsification? Light is never inside the form but outside. And it's very easy to make a difference visually and in terms of vibration too. But we are subject to what we co-created. We have co-created family ties, we have co-created beliefs. I believe in Jesus, I believe in Buddha, I believe in Moses, I believe in whoever you want. And when you die or have a death experience, you're going to be confronted with that. That is, normally before the collective event, there you are abused by your own creations, since there is no one there, you're the one who created it. So, after the Egan's alibi is quite nice, but the Egans are just as at another time. Claude, wait. Sister. It was an experience I had had with a step-nephew. A few years ago, a while ago, he had a motorcycle accident and he was in a coma, between life and death, and how, the doctors had said, they didn't know if he would get out. Well, I, at that time, prayed for him and everything. And at night, he came to see me and called me. He said, Claude, I am, in general, the disembodied who come to you always call you by your first name. Yes. Then he says, Claude, I'm lost, I'm in the dark, I don't know where I am. What year was it? Sister. So it's already been, maybe at least 10 years. All right. Maybe even more. And then I told him, but look, you have a choice, you can leave this world or you can come back. I didn't know that at the time. So of course, at the time, no. So he thinks about it and then he said to me, well, I'm coming back for my children. He had 2 boys who were now 15 and 14 years old. So, you see, they were small then. Yes, it may have been 10 years. Now he is separated from his wife. And he said to me, I'll be back. And maybe, a day or 2 later, he came back. Well, he's back. He's back. And it was fine and they never understood. They said, he is cured, there is no longer any, so out, so, which proves he didn't tell you about being a white lighter or a family member. No. He told you he was in the dark, he was lost. Yes. That is, he lived the absolute. He lived through time zero. But, the problem is that after when, but in fact it's not a problem, he doesn't remember anything. But no. He can't remember that. I asked him, because I didn't tell anyone about this. Why, he couldn't remember? Because it wasn't in her body. Yes. For example, in Dr. Eben Alexander's book, which I mentioned, you have evidence of the existence of paradise. It was this neuroscientist who had the neocortex swallowed by a bacterium, who lived through all the strata of the astral, where he even found his biological father and mother, and then he crossed the light and found himself in an area where he was lost. But when he came back, he kept the memory. Why? Because he has reconstructed his brain. But someone who goes out of the body, because he is in a coma, when he touches the absolute, he has no memory of that. Ah, there you go. So that's why I was wondering. And then there's another good thing, it's going to be recorded and so be it. When my husband died, so after me I was at peace, you see, with that, but I was sad, but I was at peace. And sometime later, that's why I'm not, I didn't have like some thoughts I had. I saw my husband disintegrate like dust. And, he told me, well, I don't know how to explain. As it disintegrated, everything we had experienced together was disintegrated. Yes, of course. So, then, what do you want me to do with this? I have memories of him, but I know it doesn't exist. Especially since he died 2 years ago. At the time when all the disembodied were placed in stashes either white paradise or in the absolute. Yes, they could still communicate. So, they, on the other hand, since you saw him go to dust. Yes, it no longer exists. Even if you do, you still have that memory and persistence. It fell as if on the ground, there was nothing left. And then it was shown to me, or it was him, I don't know, you know. That all this life we had had, and what he had had before was the same thing, it was gone. To the extent that, when you live the truth, time and space do not exist. Yes, of course, you're the only creator of your own world, your own dream. And the others are simply in quantum entanglement and participate in the same dream, because we have been locked up. From then on, of course, when you experience this kind of thing, well, it still helps to lighten you up a lot. Even if they may be suffering. How? You no longer have a story, you don't remember me, you don't remember what we lived, the good memories. There is no such thing. On the other hand, after I was angry with him, but not because of that. because of what we were to experience together, and then it was, that's it, because there was still suffering. There is suffering, until grief is over. After that it was over, yes, indeed. Yes, yes, absolutely. Indeed. But that's very constant, good when you're a little psychic. Our Father, for example, communicates regularly with us. But, once again, because he had the attribute of Mary's blue coat. If he had not had the attribute of the blue coat, he could not have manifested himself as he manifests himself. That is, he was covered in a blue coat that somehow protects him. It is the blue mantle of grace, the so-called one, that makes these beings, even before the recent period when souls were put in stasis, the beings who were dressed in this blue mantle had a certain freedom to communicate. He took advantage of it. He communicates with his ex-wife, with his daughter, with me, with his grandson with ease. But not all disembodied people can experience this. There must have been a blessing, a special protection, and in particular, what could be called a kind of affiliation to the Marian energy, and therefore, out of the confinement. But not all the disembodied are able to manifest this. And that has nothing to do with it either, and don't imagine that it's because you had a life as a saint or my father had a life as a saint. That has nothing to do with it. Yes. Wait. Sister. We saw Dad come home, well, when, about a year ago, we were at Mom's, yes. We saw him coming through the door. We've all seen it. Yes, you saw it. We saw him and then he came through the door, he left. But not all disembodied people can manifest themselves like that. But really, it was impressive. I mean, there I felt more than usual. He was there. This corresponds to some disembodied people, not all of them, who have kept, despite stasis, some form of freedom to communicate, either within their families or in other environments. Because once again, they are really and concretely clothed in the mantle, the so-called blue mantle of grace, which actually protects them from the so-called involution forces of the astral. Therefore, they have one foot in the absolute and one foot in the manifestation through the protection of the blue mantle of grace. I remind you that the blue mantle of grace, or Michael's mantle, is precisely what allows you to remember the different Christian iconographies where Mary is represented taking these souls, these children in some paintings. They are all the souls of the earth taken in her mantle. It is not his mantle. This mantle is simply an ornament that avoids what is called the astral, to a certain extent, and in particular, what was called at the time the work in blue, the fusion of the thes, which is not a white light, but a blue light. And these disembodied people, who have this form of freedom, are systematically dressed in this blue coat. It is a kind of, yes, it can be said, protection of involution forces. Wait, I'll be right there. We're listening to you. Sister. Me, Jean-Claude, Jean look, oh, sorry, excuse me. Welcome. I think 2 years ago, I had a, how to say, I passed out. What was it called? Yes. I had a pain, a syncope. Yes, like a syncope. During the night, my neck hurt too much here and I wanted to take a bath and I don't remember anything. I fell, I broke 2 teeth, etc. But I was in, and for 3 hours, actually I don't remember, that is, apparently I was walking and talking and all that. But I didn't remember anything. Yes, but you may very well have had a real syncope without having lived. Not all syncopes are related to an outing out of the body or an outing in naked consciousness. There are real syncopes where there is a total occultation of consciousness and not a liberation of consciousness. Yes. You can make a difference based on your lived experience, then. There are still real comas where the body no longer functions and consciousness does not come out. Syncope is not proof of access to the absolute. There are also syncopations, comas that are linked to pathological mechanisms. The big difference is that when you make a total NDE, even if you shun the whole astral plane, when you come back, you are deeply transformed. And the transforming agent, for example, if we take the example of the book by Dr. Eben Alexander, who is an American neuroscientist, he has crossed all strata. But what put him in the absolute was not to have lived and found his biological father and mother since he was adopted, nor even his sisters whom he did not know, When he came back, he found them, he had received the name and everything. What allowed him to be free is to live, as he describes it. After that there was light. At some point there was something sticky. There is no longer any landmark, like the testimony you said about your husband or cousin. Where there is nothing left, that is, you are lost because you cannot find yourself in the absolute. There is no top, there is no bottom, there is no inside, there is no outside, there is no visible landmark, there is no felt landmark, but that is where the beatitude is. So, the one who lives this, when he really comes back, even if he has no precise memory of this space, and this non-time and this non-space, on the other hand, the transformation is real on the level of their life after. Because it leaves a mark. Of what? Of what? Zero time. Even if they do not live the vibrations, the ascensional crowns, all this process of interfacing consciousness and vibration, well, when you listen to Dr. Eben Alexander, he is American, so he speaks American, you can see that whatever his knowledge as a scientist, he is a being who is free. So do not attribute all syncopations or losses of consciousness or knowledge to an lived experience of the truth. It can simply be a real occultation of consciousness without any memory. Besides, you can't remember anything except that you are, in quotation marks, lost, because there is no more reference point, there is no more form. This is the moment when the form dies out. And when there is no longer any form, there can be no consciousness and there remains love. This is exactly what Christine Singer expressed in her last writings, for example, who was diagnosed with cancer, and just before she died she described, when you believe that everything is destroyed, that there is nothing left, that you are devastated, that your body will die, and well there remains love. What we are. But it is not a memory, it is not an image, it is not a story, it is a lived experience. It is the same today for those who are released. This freedom of escape is not linked to a story, a scenario, neither to tomorrow, nor to yesterday. It is the total installation in the present instant, in here and now, as Enel said, in here that frees you. Besides, it's the only key. Because if you are destabilized or misaligned, or because you are in the past, there is sadness and suffering. Either you are in the future and there is an escape from reality and an astral component that appears, because you are always projecting yourself into tomorrow, into another form, into mediumnity itself, but you cannot be free. Freedom is really linked to what is called zero time, the present instant, where there is no longer any possible reference frame or possible stories. That is why we have been so disencrusted, not with our personal history, but with all stories, even vibratory ones. Because true freedom cannot be obtained by vibration. Vibration is the prerogative of consciousness. It's been explained for years. So, of course, the more the consciousness expands, the more there is an expansion of your consciousness, the more the vibration increases, the more your consciousness expands and you will lead to experiences. For example, as Siddha Krishnamurti perfectly described it, when he lost his brother, when he was so in pain that at one point the veil ripped and he saw that everything was alive. Without passing through the astral but simply here on earth, in his body. And this is the total tearing of the sails. And when these sails tear, even if they close afterwards, because at the time it was not possible, it leaves an indelible mark. Not only in consciousness but in the body, of course, in cells, in DNA, it is access to zero time. True freedom is there. No story, even the most beautiful story itself, can lead you to freedom. Freedom does not care about stories, it does not care about the past, it does not care about tomorrow, it does not care about your sores, it does not care about your thoughts, your emotions or what you think. That's why we keep repeating, especially me, as Ebba, as Baidu, that there are no other keys than the present instant. So of course, we had ODOIM a long time ago, then we had the last name and the first name that unlocks something, that sets the present instant in motion. And besides, you see it in your life when you are free, whatever the stories, whatever the course of your life, you can no longer project yourself. Even functionally in this world, it is impossible. Even if you organize things, meetings, we're obliged to organize them, but you no longer plan to do so. That is, you accept a decision and then let it happen. That is, you release attention, you release consciousness towards the event, to let it happen without you. Without it, you are not free, that is, you are constantly in control. You are constantly in need of leadership and therefore, somewhere along the line, the need to reassure yourself. And you are constantly in the future. And the future puts you under stress. When you are free, you can't stand the people who talk to you about tomorrow. Of course, we have organized, we know that tomorrow we are at the Wales, but it's as if we spent the day talking about tomorrow's day. No. We know it's tomorrow, that's all. But overall in life, we all do that. We are bound by our commitments and we think about them all the time. Because we want it to go well. Because we think we can control things. This is not living life, this is living your life. When you live life, you can't hold anything. Nothing. You let things happen, you let things be welcomed, even if you don't understand, because you will have understanding afterwards. As the mind seizes every opportunity, every vision, every energy, every projection to nourish her. But when you're free, it's impossible. Even if you want it, you can't. Life brings you back more and more frequently and more constantly in the present instant. And it is not an effort, it is not a meditation, it is not an alignment, it is not a vibration. You realize this when you were someone who tended to want to organize, prepare, control things, you realize that you can no longer control them. That's impossible. And besides, you notice that when you stop wanting to control them, well, the intelligence of the light organizes things much better than what you can do with your little head, or your little experiences, or your little references to the past. And it is a real freedom lived in this world, it is not something that waits for us to lose shape. And it changes life, of course. Even if the mind or the ego at times returns with apprehensions or questions totally justified by the habit of functioning, but after a while, you are no longer fooled. You can't plan for tomorrow anymore. In the course of a day, no matter what I do, if a friend, my girlfriend, anyone starts talking to me about the next moment, I can't be there. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I can't anymore. Because I feel very well that if people talk to me about tomorrow, beyond the reasonable, they will say, well, it will divert me to tomorrow. And of course, as I said, this sacred heart fire cannot be extinguished, but it creates a kind of inner suffering, because you will be destabilized by someone who will talk to you all the time about tomorrow. You can't do it anymore. Either you let the intelligence of the light, you'll see this more and more, or you really let the intelligence of the light make you experience what you are, or you intervene personally. That goes for everything. And of course, as I have always said, for example, in relation to a disease or disorder, you shouldn't be stupid. If it doesn't work, get treatment. But if you get into the habit first of all, as I said, of welcoming, of letting things pass through you, you will very quickly notice that your consciousness no longer intervenes, no matter what happens. So of course, seen from the outside, as Nisargadatta said, it may sound like indifference, but it is not indifference. It is much deeper than that, and it has absolutely nothing to do with indifference. It is, on the contrary, a total availability for the moment. Remember what Buddha repeated I don't know how many times, and what I also repeated. Everything that has to happen will happen, no matter what you do. Everything that doesn't have to happen, won't happen, no matter what you do. It's all written down. Every fact and gesture of life is written. Everything was written at the initial instant before the initial instant. We're just going back to the original instant. The final instant is nothing more than the initial instant. That is, we dreamed everything, we lived everything. The devil, the executioner, the victim, as well as the aggressor. We're really everything we see, without exception. Without it, as Krishnamurti said, if you make a difference, you're violent. You exclude. The trap was well designed. That is, by the time the primary anomaly was there, we couldn't realize that. Today, well, there are countless people who realize that. It makes you available for the moment, it relieves you of all your mental questions about tomorrow, it relieves you of all references to the past in relation to any suffering whatsoever, and there you are free. You're the way, the truth and the life. But as long as there is a desire on your part to take you to tomorrow or to refer to the past, it is useless. I often take the example of driving a car. It's exactly the same thing. At first, you learn to drive, you pass your code, you learn to operate the vehicle. What happens after a while to most people? Well, you don't need to think when to shift gear, you don't need to think to turn on the indicator. It's an automatic consciousness. So we go from unconsciousness to learning, from learning to consciousness and the lucidity of the actions you make, to turn on the indicator and turn the wheel, but then you know very well that it happens all by itself. You don't need to think about it. It has become an automatism. Well, it's exactly the same thing. The more you are used to non-being, to emptiness, to silence, especially as we have said, to the silence of looks, to the silence of words, the more you are in the welcoming. And the more you let yourself be crossed, the less likely you are to want to be hung up on by your character, by history, by your conscience, or by the fear of tomorrow, or by the suffering of the past, or the pain of grief, for example. But you see this every day. But it requires, not a gymnastics, not a learning, but a form of understanding, as has been said, which can only be achieved through lived experience. As long as you haven't lived it, you can think all you want, you don't have any space to solve it. This is the moment when you enter into this resilience, that is, the moment when dopamine, which is the hormone, the dopamine, as they say, which is linked to a behavioral trait called the search for novelty, disappears in favor of oxytocin. It puts an end to stress, it puts an end to projective mechanisms, it puts an end to memory mechanisms, it puts an end to habits, and it makes you available. True freedom is there, not elsewhere. That is, as long as your present instant is correlated by something from the past or by an anticipation of the future, you cannot be totally free. Again, that doesn't prevent you from organizing or predicting things, but the tension and pressure you put on a future event, you just do something and then let it happen. And it's the same for everything. For the choice of a food, even when going shopping, for the meetings you are going to make, you schedule such and such a meeting. I am not talking about the meetings here, but such and such an event, and then you let it take place. And then you'll have some surprises. But if you leave within a priori control, a willingness to organize, or even a forecast, you are not free. You submit yourself to your own conditioning and conditions that you develop yourself. The present instant, the so-called zero time, the natural state, the absolute I know neither past nor future, even here through this body. So of course you will answer me, but you have to pay the taxes on this state. Yes, but you don't have to think about it every day. The more you accept this silence and emptiness in relation to the claims of this world, whatever they may be, the more you will discover today that you are free from all societal, emotional, dietary or other laws. True freedom today is concrete. It does not happen in another state of consciousness, it happens through this body. And you can only see the effects. The effects of the intelligence of the light is when you are no longer subject to the body, that is, when your consciousness is actually and concretely relaxed in relation to the body. This is what happens when you put your body in a lying position, at rest, even without asking for anything. After a while, without even inducing sophronic or sophrological states, or hypnosis, you no longer feel your body, if it is perfectly motionless. This is indeed what happens to a living liberated person. He is perfectly aware of his body, but he lets his body live his life. And now you see that it works much better than when you impose any rules on yourself. But it requires, first of all, this total trust in the unknown, before becomes known, that is, what I have called the sacrifice of your personal will. You cannot be in the will, yours and the will of the light. It's not possible, it's totally antinomic. The will of the light, the intelligence of the light, has no use for your personal desires, or your personal intentions. To be free is, above all, not to direct the light, to let it be. As long as you believe that you are directing the light, here I will send you light, here I will pray for you, you are not free. True freedom is linked to emptiness. This emptiness is also, as I said, a form of availability in the present instant. It is the way of childhood. And that's how you understand that you can't change anything about what is. And that you really and concretely give up the pretensions to want to direct, control your life or the life of anyone, even your spouse or child. It involves restoring freedom in the face of every circumstance. Because, as soon as there is a relationship between two individuals, I may not have, no, I will not have time to show you the clean photos we took at the time, 20, 25 years ago, but we saw things like that. As soon as you get into a relationship with someone, there is always a winner and a loser. That is, there is one that emits an energy field called chemistry, and unknowingly preys on the other. And the mother-child relationship is a predation relationship, even when you talk about love and you love and there is no problem. It is very hard to accept, but it is the truth both in terms of energy and also in terms of the functioning of consciousness and the brain. Of course, there is one thing to find because you can't, again, let a child do anything. It is nevertheless necessary to guide it sufficiently, protect it, love it but always leaving it free. So, of course, I'm not saying it's easy for all cases of children or parent-child relationships, but the ideal is there. And if you have a child who is difficult, it must have been like that for you. And if you have a perfect child, it must have been like that for you too. Yes, wait. Brother, now I'm doing it, but before that you were talking about the karmic bonds of children in relation to their parents. Yes. What about adoption? So adoption, I have already regressed, indeed, on adopted children. Adoption, when children are abandoned, even if there is suffering at first, is an opportunity for enormous freedom. Because they are not subject, of course, to the bonds of the flesh. Of course, it is a pain because we know very well that a child who has been abandoned will spend his or her life searching for his or her origin. But whatever the apparent suffering, it is a life of liberation. That is, it is someone who has been totally dependent in past lives and who today must find his autonomy. And there is no better autonomy than not having a father and mother. Even if there is suffering on the part of the person. It triggers mechanisms in the soul and mind that are totally conducive to freedom. Of course, it doesn't correspond at all to the laws of the person or to karmic laws, but it is the law of love. When you are in agape, in the fire of the Sacred Heart, everything that happens has its reason, even what seems totally unjustified, totally unjust, totally incomprehensible or totally a heresy, is that at that moment, you are not free. The one who is released can never complain about a circumstance or it passes. I complain too, but about anything, but it doesn't last, it can't last. They are only fragments of habits, of mechanisms of functioning within the form. But again, as I was saying, you are never trained in a sustainable way and in a strong or long way towards the person's return. But you see the character acting, really and concretely. Silence. In fact, suffering comes from a personification that we make through roles and functions, of the husband, the wife, the children, the parents, because we attribute a value or a lack of value to a relationship and a relationship is never free. Well, we're not going to do a course on transactional analysis, but you know that in the relationship between two people, you have several qualifications. We realize that what is important is not what is conveyed between two people, affect, violence or other, but how relationships are viewed. If you have, for example, an adult who is what is called a rebellious child, who is always in conflict, if you don't know how to deal with him, the relationship will always go wrong. Eric Ben's transactional analysis made it possible, precisely, to get closer through what he called transactional analysis. What is the transaction that exists between two beings? What is it colored by? Are you in between, in front of two autonomous adults, or is there one of them in a position of subjection, or because he is a docile child so he has no autonomy? And you can see that clearly. It's like the infernal triad. The victim, executioner, rescue relationship is the same thing. And when you see things clearly, you can no longer be subjected to this infernal triad. Moreover, you consider yourself a victim, you consider yourself a rescuer. In general we avoid the executioner. Even if you are the executioner, you don't want to know that you are the executioner. But we still consider ourselves a rescuer or a victim. But stop with that. You're victims, we are all victims only of ourselves. There are no more devils than mosquitoes, only butter on the skewer. When you get through this, you're really autonomous and you're really free. That is, the way you see the transaction, even if it's not between two human beings, but between, I was taking the example of the mosquito, between the mosquito and you, and well shows you the stupidity of this kind of reaction. Everything that happens comes from you. Nothing can come from anywhere else. Whoever you judge, you only judge yourself, what Christ said. That is the truth. And besides, it has a neurobiological impact. The judgment itself is the circuit of punishment. That is, if you make a judgment about yourself, about any circumstances, you strengthen the punishment circuit and, of course, you will never get a reward. Whereas if you're in non-judgment, as they say, in acceptance, in embracing, in crossing, you'll see that the reward circuit sets itself up on its own. And besides, it has a neurobiological impact. The judgment itself is the circuit of punishment. That is, if you make a judgment about yourself, about any circumstances, you strengthen the punishment circuit and, of course, you will never get a reward. Whereas if you're in non-judgment, as they say, in acceptance, in embracing, in crossing, you'll see that the reward circuit sets itself up on its own. And besides, the circuit of reward, since we have seen it among mystics, the true mystics, of those who delude in the astral, it is very simple. The one who is astralized, as Bernard de Montreal said, has a punishment circuit that is very dominant on the reward circuit. He is constantly judging himself, constantly discriminating between good and evil. To free him, there is no right or wrong. There is only what must be. It makes a big difference in terms of experience. And also in terms of what will happen in your life. In one case, you subjugate yourself to the way you judge, you will be judged, Christ said. And you are the one who judges yourself, there is no external judge. And you are living this judgment as we speak. Sister, there are also people who force us to judge. I am someone who does not judge, but in a spontaneous way, that's it, and it was constantly, I had to think that about this or that person, and I couldn't get rid of this imposition, yes, and your conscious mind can do nothing about it. Once again, it is because the punishment circuit, spontaneously, is stronger than the reward circuit. So when you are submissive, it didn't come inside me, if you will, it wasn't me who wanted to judge this or that person, well, I mean, I never, ever, better, bring an opinion on these things, and nevertheless, at some point in my life, I met a being who, little by little, came to try to impose a point of view on friends I had previously who were living their lives not at all the way I was living mine, because I had many things first, I had myself. So already I didn't necessarily have the same possibilities as the others to play the lottery. Well, I limited myself at the beginning, because, it makes sense what I. And everything is a pretext, either with a husband, a companion or a friend. At that time it was, but your friend, she's this and your friend, I was saying. But what do you care? Well, it's your business, and it was constantly, so little by little, it came to touch as many spheres, as many people as I could, but without my realizing it, I found myself isolated from my family. Well, I no longer had a close family, but a sister I saw, even if we didn't confide much, because there was a difference of 9 years, but that was all a lie. And not only was everything a sham, but if I gave my assent, in fact, not assent since I had nothing to say about it, well, I was the one who, But it's because you're a phony like them that you don't want to judge them. It's really terribly painful. I expressed, during one of the last satsangs, when you make a choice, you think you're choosing, your husband, your wife, your car, your food, that is false, that is totally false. I know what happened at that level, that is, when my mother was gone, there, I said, well, now it's time for me to meet what I have to meet. I know it won't be love, at least make sure not bored, and indeed, it wasn't love, and as far as boredom is concerned, well, I would have liked to be bored with a little more. And besides, I knew where I was going to meet him, and when I arrived, it was in a children's boarding school where I had found a place as a boarding school supervisor. I knew it would be there, and I saw 4, 5 supervisors, and I thought to myself, but damn it, he's not there. In all the people I had seen, I knew it wasn't one of those people I was supposed to meet, and the next evening, in fact, a supervisor came along, and I thought that's it, and that was really the person I was supposed to meet. Remember that these circuits of reward and punishment work without your conscious awareness, and make you believe that you are the one who decides. Now, as the circuit of punishment, in all human beings, until they have broken the myth of immortality, are subjected to this circuit of punishment, all the choices you will make, even in reflection, are only punishments. That's the way it works, unfortunately. I already knew it wouldn't be love if you wanted it somewhere. I knew before, but I wasn't in the punishment system at all and all that, you know. I wasn't affected by the punishment. I was free, I lived alone, I was counting on myself and it suited me very well, and I had been going through it for a long time like that. But even though I was very young, it was absolutely no problem for me. I knew that when I needed something, I just had to issue it, but not even ask for it. And if I needed a new studio, because my neighbors were starting to get heavy on me. There you go. A week later, I met an old friend who told me, well, I'm all alone, my sister left, if you want to live, why don't you come and settle down with me? Well, it was falling, perfect, and everything was like that, and in fact it was setting up and I didn't even have to say, oh, I would need a studio. All I had to do was say, I can't stand this neighborhood anymore, I don't feel good with this neighborhood, and so it led me to believe that I had to go elsewhere, and it was being done. And then, when I met that person, there was a kind of external confinement, because inside I was still as free as ever, but there were lots of things, threats, things said or not said, but which made me actually free, but confined within. I could no longer say what I think, I could no longer live my relationship with others as I like to live it, that's it. Everything was analyzed, dissected, there to attack in fact. No, but this has nothing to do with it. What we call a narcissistic pervert has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Yes, but in the end it's that, but that's it. If you want, it's like the principle a woman or a man, rather a woman who has been beaten by her father, she will necessarily come across men who beat her. It's constant, you can do nothing about it, it's in your aura, until you decide. I wasn't beaten. My mother was beaten, however, by my stepfather in front of me. It was a huge shock that adults were fighting together, yes, but that you can't free yourself from it. Life means that when you see these scenes of child violence, you will reproduce them in adulthood, whether you like it or not, because it is part of your vibratory structure. Violence against a woman, especially when it is related to authority, to the father, to a woman, when she will reach adulthood, she has a pathology on the second chakra, and she will necessarily meet violent men. It is constant, and you have no way of escaping it, because it is vibratory collages that work without your personal consciousness knowing, and that will bring you by energy resonance, beings that will make you relive the same thing. It was perfectly demonstrated by Mark Frecht. I had the opportunity to talk about it, the one who found the memorized cellular biological cycles, who explained that all your life, and Dominic Warburg too, who studied the structure of the brain, perfectly explained it. You build a cycle between 0 and the moment when you're independent of your parents, but you built this first cycle only by what the parents tell you and what the parents make you live. And in all your cycles, for example, if financial independence goes to 20 years, from 20 to 40, you will go through the same events, with a different color, of course. And sometimes, it takes 2, 3 cycles. They are loops that occur in the architecture of the neocortex, which is the relay of consciousness, but which is not consciousness, which will make you relive these scenarios, but indefinitely, it is the structure of the brain. It's not even a problem of consciousness or lucidity, you can't do anything about it, you can't do anything about it. The difference is that it was not violence that I received myself from my stepfather. I never allowed to be violent with me, so, once again, I remind you that your personal history concerns your person. I am talking to you about the general rule, regardless of your person. These rules, they are constant, whether you like it or not, that's how it works. Well, yes, it's happening again, but not necessarily. Necessarily, well, I'm not going to go into. I had already explained on these memorized cellular biological cycles of Mark Frecht, that I had a chance to know, we're on something that is proven at the level of the architecture of the neocortex, the brain's grey matter, which is the relay of consciousness. Consciousness has nothing to do with the brain, but it's linked to dopamine, it's linked to feedback loops that happen without your knowledge, that happen all your life. All Mark Fresh has found is that you go through the law of the past and the AYOUN, whether you like it or not. So, on a personal level, I repeat what I told you, someone who has had suffering in relation to man in his childhood, abandonment, violence of any kind, negligence, will, without his knowledge of his own free will, necessarily encounter the same type of situation in his emotional relationships later on. And you can't escape it. That's the akontic confinement, that you're not given the opportunity to understand what's happening to you, and all your life you're repeating the same things, it's constant. This is neither nor vibratory, it is the very architecture of the brain, which is a heresy. I remind you that we are missing a brain compared to cetaceans. I remind you that we are missing a brain compared to cetaceans. They have what are called paralimbal zones, which are nothing more than the triangle of air and water, the points hic and nums essentially, which are developed, and when you have a paralimbal lobe, you are no longer affected by these stories of passing and dying, that is, the architecture of the cetacean neocortex has nothing to do with humans. We, human beings, who are subjected to unliving confinement, do everything we can to ensure that the same scenarios are constantly repeated. And we can't escape it, even with your personal understanding. You're obliged to go through this kind of transfiguration and transubstantiation, which goes through acceptance. That is to say, everything you oppose is getting stronger, and as if by chance, you're not the culprit, you come in, you have a violent father or an absent father, it's the same thing, and then you're going to find men who still correspond to the father's image, even if you defend yourself and say, it's not possible, I don't want, that's exactly what will happen. Because it is under the influence of the second chakra, the male relationship, and you can't escape it. The escape of this thing, it goes far beyond the framework of understanding, it goes through an aspect of revolution of consciousness. Well, Mark Fresh, of whom I am talking, was studying the sights of children with leukemia, who were with the terminal stage. So he was investigating long before they died, because we knew they were going to die, on the parents. What they had experienced at the same agent that they induced in their child's life. He waited for the children to fall into a coma, to go whisper to them about the event the parents had experienced. The child would come out of the coma instantly. He died a month later. When he updated it, he didn't have time to write it. He was at the Institut Curie in Paris. A month later he died of sudden liver cancer. That is, as if he had discovered the truth too early. But it's inevitable. So everything we think we decide, everything we think we choose, is not free. Without our knowledge of our own free will, without our satisfaction, we operate like machines. That's what I want you to touch with your finger, that you can't escape your brain. You cannot escape neural circuits, which are feedback and feedback loops in the architecture of the 10 layers of the neocortex. You can't escape the decisions of your bacteria that tell you to eat sugar as long as you have these bacteria in your stomach. It's not you who decide to like sugar, it's the bacteria in your stomach. And that's how it is with all the food choices you make. For example, you say, oh my god, but I need dairy products, and you eat dairy products, cheeses all the time, saying that it makes you feel like, no, it's your bacteria in your stomach that control that. You have no space of freedom within the person, even the decisions you think you are making do not belong to us. That's what I'm getting at, is that even in the feeling of having a choice or a decision, you don't decide anything, you just follow the lines of programs that have been written, the video game, and you're convinced that it's us who act, who decide. That is not true. Whether it is the choice of a husband, the choice of a car, the choice of a food, you are not in control of anything. It is the whole subterfuge of the ego that tries to make us believe that we have choices and decisions. That's not true, that's not true. Today, the conclusion we have in neuroscience are through the neurosciences of behavior or the so-called spiritual neurosciences, neuroethology, and, above all, neurotheology, is that all this is perfectly clear. So you have scientists who, on the one hand, have proven the truth of all this, and on the other hand, you have beings struggling to fight or oppose it, even though they are fundamental laws. For example, I explained for sugar, if you eat sugar, it is not because you like sugar, you're emotionally deficient, it is because you have encouraged the development of bacteria that send you to consume sugar. Likewise, as I said last week, if you have albicans monilias in your stomach, you will be attracted to dairy products and cheeses, because the bacteria in your stomach, they feed on dairy products and cheese, and it hurts you, and you'll think that it is you who decides. Sister, so where do these bacteria come from? What? Where do these bacteria come from? Sister, the bacteria you're talking about, why do some of them have more cheese bacteria? Well, they're here because one day you ever saw that food, she settled in on that occasion, and then the food is a dictatorship of intestinal bacteria. Why I insisted in the satsangs on restoring intestinal immunity, so that's why we call it the microbiota. And unfortunately, human beings believe that in their decisions, even the most mature, the most thoughtful, they are free. But you are never free in the decisions we make as a person. Never, never, never. And the more we are convinced of understanding, of choosing, the less freedom you have to choose. Unfortunately, that's the way it is with everything. It is in this sense that the person, the personality, the temperament, the history, are a total scam. Even if there is a learning and an impression of understanding and surpassing, it cannot be true, since all behaviors are induced, 1. by intestinal bacteria, 2. by the circuits of punishment and reward. That's how everything works. That's the video game. You do not have the possibility to go where it has not been programmed, whether in the initial scenario, the initial moment, or in the unfolding of the expansion and entropy of consciousness, through, for example, the confinement of the AYOUNs. As long as it is not clearly seen, somewhere, you remain dependent on your history, your experience and your learning, but as I said, even if it serves others who recognize themselves, who do not recognize themselves, there is still through it, what is called cognitive slavery, since from the moment you refer to your past, you are not free in the instant, it is not possible, since you yourself think of your past. Now well, it is. Yes, but only incidentally, since we are testifying to, but I am not at all dependent on it, that is, you feed. Today, I am not dependent on it, the dependence I had was my responsibility towards my children, whom I saw, whom I raised free, the first of whom until the age of 8 alone, and who had a completely harmonious development, relationships, etc. And when the father, whose personality I didn't expect since these people hide a lot of things, well, they are very clever, and I'm rather naive too, anyway, what I mean above all by that is that we are manipulated by ourselves at all levels. We come to that, at some point, almost necessarily because we are part of a spiral in spite of ourselves. There is a spiral in spite of ourselves that is being set up, and there has been the responsibility between parents that we absolutely cannot. But here I am, my way of raising my children is that they should be open to everyone, and that on the other hand, they receive a totally opposite influence, namely the others are systematically against us. There is a moment when there is a clash going on, including in the child, and it was in relation to this clash that I saw set up, and the damage that it could cause, that I felt responsible for the whole thing, since I was all alone in power. It is the purpose of confinement, it is to make you responsible, to make us responsible and guilty, even when you think you're doing the right thing. Everything is done to strengthen these links, absolutely everything, in society, in the parent-child relationship, it is the same thing. This is intolerable, so does that change for the one who is free? No. Those who know me, who know my son, because I have a totally free relationship with my son, that is, there is not, in either direction, the slightest possibility of coercion, that is, not only respect, and that is how it has been since he was a kid, a total freedom that has been granted. But this freedom is not anarchy, it is not letting him do anything. I could sometimes be very authoritarian when necessary, but nevertheless it allows to build a relationship where this love is lived as free. He's more my boyfriend than my son. But that's what I had established with my eldest son, since for 8 years I raised him alone and then he was fine, but that's it. After that, you still have to, because I see that I had difficulty adjusting, because I was in the reception of everything that he could bring, after the question I asked myself once and which, Moreover, it was, that is, 4 or 5 years ago, he really went spontaneously towards everyone, everything, and then I realized that there were still dangers with regard to children in this world, if only children who were stolen, children who disappeared. Well, he looked like an angel, so he was very much looked at, people wanted to take pictures of him, etc. And at one point I thought to myself, that's it, if I'm not elsewhere when I leave school, or whatever. So I wanted to bring a thoughtfulness, but at the same time I didn't want this thoughtfulness to close it off on others, and there I was a little bit powerless on how to do it, and I was waiting for his father's return to explain that to him, that he would help me a little to find the right place. And in the end, that was a disaster, so I reassure you, on the other hand there are no parents or children, it doesn't exist since you are all alone and there is no one else, so that the very relationship, what I was saying this morning about the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine, no longer has any meaning, when you are totally inserted in the instant, all these historical, personal or collective notions no longer make any sense. That's how the open relationship exists, that is, it's no longer a relationship in the sense of transactional analysis, torture a victim or infernal triad, torture a victim rescuer, or parent-child, but any relationship at that time becomes free, that is, it's not conditioned by a role, it's not conditioned by a history, it's not conditioned by a memory. It is the only time, and the only opportunity, that you have to live this permanent sacred heart fire, that is, at that moment, you can no longer effectively consider your children as your children, you can no longer consider anyone as privileged or inferior to anyone. But unfortunately there is this history that we all carry, this habit to form, what we have called the karmas that are linked to the person, but the one who is free is not subjected to any karma whatsoever, it is a heresy, and he lives it concretely in his flesh, in his life, in his consciousness, every day. So, at first, we don't see it right away, but as the months and years go by, we can only see it. In other words, the very relationship, as I explained to you, father-child, or mother-child, no longer exists, it can no longer exist. No, but anyway, it's very specific, it's equal, of sharing, it is no longer a transaction, because the transaction involves, like the commercial transaction, a sender, a receiver, a means of communication and understanding. If they are banknotes, then you pay in euros, such an object is worth so much, so you have to give so many banknotes. In the relationship called transactional analysis, there is no freedom. The only true free relationship is the agape or fire of the sacred heart type relationship, where there, no role or reference to experience can interfere in any way. What I want to draw your attention to is that, if you reflect yourself through your experience to your past, lived experience which has taught you many things, you are depriving yourself of the freedom of the present instant. That's what I want to draw your attention to, you know. So from the moment you depolarize your system by evoking a memory, even very happy, you are not free, because at that moment you react. It is the theory of the complaint, but it works in any kind of past joy. You have the ability as a conscious being and co-creator of your reality, from the moment you think or express, or you have memories, even very happy, of a past moment, you reinstall it in the present and you update it in the present. That's why all the techniques today, that's what we are discovering with neuroscience, that all therapies, whatever they may be, whether it's psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, cognitive therapy, family constellations, anything that involves memory, anything that involves memories, deprive you of freedom. And that's constant. In addition, at the neuroscientific level, it has been demonstrated that being free is being. But even if it's disabled, even if there is, it's still my story now. No, it's not disabled, expressing it is reactive. I'm telling you the opposite. No, that's not true. If in the present, yet it doesn't cause me any embarrassment at all. But there's nothing you can do about it. It is without your knowledge of your own free will, as we already verified with the Klein effect 30 years ago. We have the proof today in neuroscience. It is the theory of the complaint. When you talk about a past moment, even happy, I'm not even talking about rape stories or anything else, but very happy, your best memory, you know, a very strong thing you've lived in your life. If you bring it up or if you think it up, even alone, without anyone, well, you're no longer in the present. This is a constant. Freedom cannot be accompanied by any kind of history. So it is a whole mechanism of learning about freedom that we are experiencing at the moment. That's why I'm telling you this. It's not a criticism, it's not a judgment, but just being lucid about it if you want to. When you think of a past moment, even joyful, you are no longer in the present. And in addition, it can be seen at the neuroscientific level with PET scans, MRIs, and we already saw it at the Klein effect at the time. Freedom does not suffer from compromise, that is, being fully in the fire of the Sacred Heart in this immutability of the instant, leaves no place for any memory. That is not possible. Because from the moment you have a memory, once again, even of something very, very happy, you are not free, you are not available for the present instant. And it joins this notion of emptiness, of acceptance, which allows you to settle permanently, beyond any personal history, and beyond any memory. True freedom is there is no other. That is to say, as long as you rely on tomorrow, we saw earlier for the projections, the organization and everything, but it is also true for what has been lived in the legend or the personal history. You're not the result of your past. As long as you believe you're the result of your past, you enslave yourself to your own history. And that's constant. It's not me who says it, it's what we've demonstrated in neuroscience, but it's formal. In the work that Ekman and Gilliam have done on emotional intelligence, where MRIs were done to real mystics who had experienced tangible, transcendental real things, it is clear that, in this case, what I said, the reward circuit takes precedence over the punishment circuit, that people have real edema in the brain on the Hirschsprung points, which is what Dr. Hammer found when someone was going to die of a heart attack, or had a heart attack, he found edema in the Hirschsprung areas. So true freedom cannot be referenced to any event from the previous moment. This is a gymnastics that is done naturally in the alchemy between what is called consciousness, supraconsciousness and consciousness, but for that you have to be available, that is to say that as long as you nourish, in one way or another, even a happy memory, you cannot be totally free. You'll have moments of freedom, you'll have experiences of freedom, you'll have experiences, but the immutability of the fire of the Sacred Heart is frozen by the past or the next instant. It is not possible to change the fire of the Sacred Heart. So how do you do it when your own children, even if you no longer have any demands or anything towards them, or even a proposal for that matter, continue and persist in wanting to keep you in this line where you have been put? Of course, but that's the way everyone behaves, that's what I mean. Children also keep you in these timelines, so what should you do in these cases? Well, there's nothing you can do, if not accept it, and that's what will make the other person free. Because simply listening to someone who is part of this recrimination, we're going to say, reproaches or even satisfaction, it would be the same thing. A child who will repeat to you, "Mom, I love you, you raised me so well educated," it's the same thing, the result is the same. In other words, you are part of the linearity of time in spite of yourself, but it is precisely through this challenge, since it happens to you, that it must happen. Yes, but I grabbed it because at first I thought, well, I had a tendency to want to answer no, stop, and then finally, and then it would reactivate, it would revive. You get away from us, and then I stopped trying to explain, but that, well, what Eckhart Tolle said, what he wrote about the present instant is totally true. You cannot be in the present instant, as soon as there is a reminiscence of any past, you cannot be in the present instant, as soon as you think about tomorrow. It is a gymnastics that must be accepted, because it is provable, proven, demonstrable in neuroscience, it suffers no exception. The only possible freedom is the fullness of the present instant, and the fullness of the present instant cannot be colored, neither by tomorrow, nor by yesterday, nor by your wounds, nor by your joys. Without that you are not free. You submit yourself, you condition yourself, in relation to your history, your personal history, even if it has allowed you to go beyond, to see clearly, at a given moment, you can no longer make references to this past, whatever it is, good or bad, we do not even make a difference. That is to say that you discover that true freedom, it is not linked to the person. As they say, it is not the person who is freed, we are freed from the person. And when you are liberated from the person, you pass into fire of the permanent sacred heart. So, all the references to the past, of course, I have the memory of my childhood, of my mother, of what I lived, but never, ever, does it ever come to the surface or manifest itself in the present instant. It's not possible without it, it's not the present instant. It is the past or the next instant that colors the present instant. So this notion of zero time, of ultimate presence, of eternal, well, you call it what you want, has a substrate that is linked to the architecture of your brain. So evidently, that's what I was saying, those who know neuroscience are much more advantaged than those who are in a pure process of living the conscience, because they know the laws. Astrophysicists are the same. Why Nassimha Romain only talks about joy now? Because he knows that the foundation of the universe is joy, and from there, the more you settle into it, the fewer references you can take for yourself, as with emotional relationships with the past. The relationship with a child, whatever his age, she is free of the instant. If my child is my child, he is no longer my child, but if he tries to bring me back to a circumstance of the past by an even joyful memory, no, I put myself in the present instant. Because the simple memory, even of happy moments, even if it has effects, I told you last week, I told someone to think of an Esteo session he did the week before, we have the same effect as the Esteo's hands-on the Klein effect. But even if you update it in the present, it is not zero time. You bring back an element of the past into the present moment. Of course, it helps the person, but never, ever, you can't be free of the person like that. When I insist on this notion of being free of the person, it is an objective reality, it is independent of vibrations, it is independent of energies, it is independent of visions, but what you get from it is a feeling of freedom that no historical element, even in the most wonderful story, can make you live. So, when you have elements like that happen, well, for the future, it's very simple, it's too much fun to see, people who need to organize, to control, but for the past, what do you want to do, since you have iterations all the time, that is, memory loops that come back, that are linked to your brain structure, and that color you in the present moment with a reference to the past. Always, that's human nature. That, well, once again I repeat, neuroscientists and astrophysicists have understood it perfectly. So for them it is even easier, because they have an intellectual, real, objective understanding, which allows them to overcome, without any difficulty, the attachment to the past or history. That's why people like Dr. Eben Alexander or Nassimha Romain, whatever their external knowledge, are much more capable of living this freedom than anyone who has experienced things that are extremely pleasant for them, or extremely unpleasant. It makes no difference. Because even if it was a learning experience, at some point, you have to let the intelligence of light happen, and the intelligence of light does not need you. She doesn't need your story, she doesn't need your memoirs, she doesn't need references or support in the past. So this is an intellectual gymnastics, neither nor vibratory, that we must understand. So neuroscientists, astrophysicists have understood it, that's why Nassimha Romain only talks about joy now, that's why Eben Alexander only talks about the absolute, because they have lived it, and they have the structure of external knowledge that allows them to accept and understand. What we do not necessarily have when we are in spirituality, in energy, in feeling, in vibration. Now that's an obstacle. Unintelligible. But I guarantee you that your brain works without your knowledge of your own free will like that. No, but I can hear that, but we're always on the move. I'm not replacing it with anything else either. Yes, but freedom is really the freedom of the person, that is, you're free from your person. That's why I had trouble understanding how it worked here, how the codes worked here, what the codes were, but this is something that is very, very well known today, and there is no photo, that is, at the moment when there is a radical transformation that occurs in relation to the mechanisms of linear functioning, let's say, historical or projective, well, you feel it in yourself. That is, you can see that your memories, your feelings, whether pleasant or unpleasant, do not train you. That is to say, you remain motionless, a memory that happens, oh yes, it passes. But you don't give them weight, you don't give them credit, you don't deny them either, but it doesn't affect you anymore. On the other hand, the simple fact of, I repeat, remembering an event, even without talking about it between us, in your head, sometimes it happens, we all know that, you're here and then all of a sudden, hop, there are memories happening. Well, that already takes away your freedom, even happy events. I'm not only talking about trauma, suffering, and when you perceive it clearly, well obviously, you realize that you remain immutable, that memory can appear, but that it does not lead to any change in energy, nor any change in your mood, and that we see it on MRIs, we really see it. And this is what differentiates what could be called the astral from the truth, that is, the astral is colored by memories, by emotions, by projection as we have seen, whereas the one who is free cannot be colored, whatever he has lived, and whatever he will live. And that's a lot less weight. Of course, I have the lucidity of my childhood, of all my past lives even, but it doesn't help me. No, but neither do I don't lean on it if you want. The problem is that even when you accept, it's useless. It's when it happens, through the feedback loops of your neocortex, it reactivates them in the present. So we all unintentionally color our present instant with the future instant and the past instant. It is the way that brain works, but it is not the way that consciousness works. So you have to be lucid about that. Obviously I don't have time to develop all this stuff, so go look at Dr. Eben Alexander on this in her domain, or Eckhart Tolle himself, because they have an understanding that passes over something solid, you know, that is not just a feeling or a mechanism of consciousness. It is something that is imprinted in our body, even at the cellular level. True freedom doesn't care about history. Of course, we are all different, we all have a temperament, even if we have overcome the ego, which is linked to our personality structure, which means that it will always be present. But this history of the past and the future is fundamental. Because being free means that you can't rely on any past reference and you see it in your life. You really see it concretely in what you are living. You realize that there is no memory that manifests itself. And this is a total relaxation, it is true inner and outer freedom. And there, you can no longer be affected, whatever your wounds or whatever your joys, your present instant is totally free. And it changes everything really and concretely. That is what is happening to everyone. Come on, I'm tired of moving around. Brother, I would just like to say that living in the present instant, in fact, is being liberated from the person, and it is at the same time, it necessarily brings the silence of the mind, somewhere. And so, that's it, yes, absolutely, yes. But this silence of the mind is not a silence of words, the silence of the mind is precisely that the present instant is no longer affected by these reminiscences, memories, emotions, effects. But you see that when you see it, you know that you are free, there is only, whatever the filial, emotional, societal or other relationship, all the instants I live in what could be a bond, family, emotional, are free. And of course, it lightens the relationship, it fluidifies it, it pacifies it, whatever the story has been, happy or unhappy, that's how you are free in the present instant, you see, and that's how you realize that you live this instant in freedom, without there being memories or reminiscences from your past that come to saturate you with information, emotions and knowledge, you see. And that, when you experience it, is fundamental. Fundamental, because you know that you are free, you know that what you live, even if you have an identity, a name, and yet you don't always remember it. Sometimes you don't know who you are. When you are driving you don't know where you are going, where you don't know what you're doing, it's not important, because what remains is freedom. And this freedom is not a concept, it is not an energy, it is not a vibration, it is not even a state of consciousness. So, you can't describe it by a vibration, it's just a state that I call permanent that has replaced the state of the person. But that you observe from week to week, from month to month, and you can no longer, even if you wanted to, you can no longer be affected by the past, whoever it is, you can no longer be affected by tomorrow, whoever it is, and then you immerse yourself, naturally, more and more in the present instant and you see increasingly clearly what is in the present instant order or what comes from anywhere. And the only way to be complete, to be in this bliss, is the present instant. And not an experience of joy, or naked consciousness, but a permanent state. And as long as you have a present instant that is correlated by a memory, by a past experience, or by a projection into the future, you are not totally free. I can say that because I've been through all these states and I see it now. Not only do I have an explanation in terms of architecture and neuroscience, but it's also an lived experience. I can see that, as the months and years go by, I can no longer be affected by an emotional bond or by anyone else. I can only love. When I say that, it's the truth. There are no enemies. It doesn't mean anything. The enemy is me, at another time. How could I not love my enemy when he eats me? It is not a mental game, nor an energy game. It is a concrete reality. There is no child to hold on to, no violent husband or wife, no unhappy or happy experience. There is only that. And the more it sets in, the more you see it. You see it, and it's that I explained, well, through even the speech, the simple words that are used by a brother or sister, you know instantly, it's not an energetic, vibratory feeling or visions. The words you're going to use betray it if you can say it, or demonstrate it, and you can't be deceived by that. You can't, because you can see very well that your moment, whatever your sufferings of yesterday were, they no longer exist. Even if you want to remember it, you can remember it, but there is no action in the present. And it's the same for past lives. I've always said I know all my past lives, but I don't care, because all past lives, even in functions or roles, the most pathetic or prestigious, have nothing to do with the truth. And that I have lived it, I am living it, it is a constant. However, I reiterate, you cannot be free as long as you revive any past moment. It is in that sense, that is, as long as you need, spontaneously, naturally, to rely on your history, and well it is simple, you cannot be free, it is impossible. You'll have experiences of freedom, you'll have vibratory experiences, you'll have visions, but the real freedom I'm talking about is something that cannot be ignored, that is, when you live it, in an extensive way, from day to day, from week to week, from month to month, it is evident that this is it. You can't even explain it, but you know that not everything else is that. And it frees you from everything. When I say it frees you from everything, it's because you're available to live totally in the present instant, no matter what happens. This does not prevent the character from gibbering, from saying that he is not happy, but it happens in the present instant. It is not colored by the past instant or by the history, or it is not colored by a fear of tomorrow, whatever it may be. It is like that. You have no other choice and no other possibility, in addition to living this famous zero time, not to live at certain moments during resonances, but to let it flourish, if I can say, through the 24 rays of the fire of the Sacred Heart. There is no other possibility. Whether you take it in every sense, the architecture of consciousness and the architecture of the brain reflect this, and even the architecture of energy. If I have time, I may show you some clean photos we took more than 30 years ago, which were eloquent. At the time, we did not have the evidence from neuroscience, from the dosages of neurotransmitters and all that. Today we have the formal proof. And freedom can never, ever be accompanied by a past moment. It is impossible, whatever that moment may be, even the happiest or the most unfortunate. Without it, you derive the balance and emptiness that you feel, this state of beatitude, of bliss. It will move away, and when you see it move away, and well you quickly understand that, one, you have no choice, and that two, you can only function like that, and no other. That's impossible. But once again, I tell you, those who know the architecture of the brain, astrophysics or the laws of gravitation or electromagnetism are better able to live it today than those who are in the mechanics of consciousness. So yes, understanding and intellect, not mind, intellect, intellectual understanding brings you much more easily to the truth today than any element of the past or the future. And that's fundamental, because it's accessible to everyone. It is not something that needs to be researched, it is not an effort, you just have to accept and verify it. Not to believe it, but just try it and you'll see. It can't fail, but you still have to try it. Again, it's not refutation or denial, it's a crossing. That is, that's when you realize that you're free. It is when your present moment can no longer depend on any previous or next moment. Yes, 10 more minutes. That's how you experience freedom and not otherwise. 2 years ago I would have told you. You have to raise the vibrations, you have to open the chakras, you have to activate the gates, the stars, the wave of life, the Marian channel, the ascension crown, awaken the channel of the ether and finally the kundalini, to approach freedom. Today, that is not true. It is not because things have changed, it is because the revelation of zero time since last year is accessible to everyone. Time zero is an information field. When you bring zero time, you contaminate everyone, not because you want to contaminate someone, but because you were there, what I called the catalyst. The chemical reaction occurs, but you don't act. Christ acted like that in quotation marks. People were touching it and they were healed. The blind man was cured, the paralytic got up, the bleeding woman was no longer bleeding, but he had done nothing, he had not asked for anything, he had not set energy in motion, he had not prayed to his Father, he had not given any intention or attention to what was happening, but he was fully present to himself. By being fully present to yourself, that is, in zero time, your life can only become a miracle. It is a permanent miracle, provided you accept it. But it can't be both, and the further we go, the more you will see it, and the more we will all live it, the more days pass. True freedom is in the present instant, it is not in history, it is not in tomorrow, it is not even in the vibrations, nor in the energy. That was a feeling, which does not mean that we must deprive ourselves of the feeling. As I said this morning, I feel as much my Marian channel as before, my energies, my 3 crowns, the wave of life as before, but simply I am no longer trained or dependent on what is happening on that level. That's how you're totally lucid, and that's how you're free. Without it, it's not a freedom. The real freedom is to be totally inserted in this zero time. In zero time, as I have always said, there is no energy, there is no vibration, there is nothing. And it is precisely this emptiness, what Christian Singer, or Alexander, said. Well, Christian Singer, she is dead, but she expressed it perfectly. It is when you have nothing left, when your life is devastated, physically and intellectually, and you no longer have the opportunity to think, move, and you're dying, that you live freedom there. But today we can live it without having to die, without having to leave our home, our wife, our husband, or anyone else, simply by being fully immersed in the present instant. And you will see that if you were really and concretely, fully immersed in the present instant, everything that was in focus, memories, wounds, discomforts, diseases, can only disappear totally and entirely, even the so-called hereditary diseases, and even the so-called fatal diseases. That is the truth. There are thousands of brothers and sisters who are living it today, who have lived through incredible healings. They did not seek to be healed, they did not do anything about it. They have given up any claim to want to direct, control or be master of their time, or be master of their space. That's the sacrifice, there's no other way. But if you accept it, you cross, and just behind it is true freedom, which is not accompanied by any conditions, circumstances, history, future and past, and there you can only be in bliss. It is not even naked joy, it is not even vibrations that escape there from the radiance of the Sacred Heart, it is a state of total evidence. And once again, you can only recognize yourself in this state. You can't go wrong, it's impossible. And the closer you start to get to that, the more it can only grow, the more you can only recognize yourself, beyond any scenario, any body and any world. It's real, it's not concepts, it's in lived experience, and this lived experience, well, we're living it. But if you feed the next instant, without your knowledge of your own free will, we will say, if you feed your story, again without your knowledge of your own free will, especially when you are happy or unhappy, it doesn't matter, you move away from the present instant. It's as simple as that. I am not the first to say it, Eckhart Tolle wrote dozens of books on it. But today this is all the more true, because there are no longer any primary anomalies. When you are in any religion, you are violent. When you are in any spiritual movement, you are violent, that is, you exclude all others. But how do you want to live the being indifferentially the non-being, if you reject anything? You can only go through everything, as you are, the other is me, he's in me, the other is me, I'm the one who dreamed it, and everyone can say that about all creation. There is no creator, there is no God, there is no devil, we are all that at once, and it is a truth, it is not a view of the spirit, an energy or a vibration, a vision, that will lead you to this. On the contrary, it is an act of total abandonment, it is not even an act of faith, it has been called sacrifice, yes I accept to lose my life, moreover Christ had said it. Those who will want to keep their lives will lose it, those who will accept to lose it will find it. That is exactly what we are living, but in a more than formal way, and it concerns the whole of creation, the whole of what is present on earth, and everything is resolved on earth, indeed, because it all started here. There is no space and there is no time. How do you want to live freedom if you are subject to time or space? It is not possible. You can approach it, you can experience states, vibrations, experiences, but it will not be something or you recognize yourself. There is really a kind of continuity for the one who is free, whatever happens, whatever he thinks, whatever he says, whatever the pain, whatever the accident, whatever the suffering, even in the instant. It is not forbidden to suffer in the instant. You have an event that makes you suffer in the instant. But if you accept it, you remain in the instant. Suffering has no more reason to exist. If suffering exists, it is because somewhere, unconsciously, you have nothing to do with it, you want it. It goes very, very far what I am telling you, and that's what I'm telling you. It's not a philosophical concept, it's an experience, which is perfectly demonstrable by neuroscience or molecular biology. I could also give you lessons in molecular biology, it would be exactly the same thing. So you cannot be mistaken about yourself, because from the moment you live this permanence of the fire of the Sacred Heart, or of the Eternal I, you know it. You can no longer deceive yourself, and you can no longer deceive anyone, even without your knowledge of your own will. It is not possible, it is impossible. Come on, let's take a little break, it's already 6 o'clock, it goes fast. Sister, just a quick question. Yes. You were talking about dopamine earlier, okay. I know, because I was given some to treat depression. You were given dopamine, and so it didn't do anything at all. It's just, it won't do anything. It's just, clench your teeth, because, it won't do anything. We know today in pharmacology, the only product that will definitively and totally free you from depression is DMT. DMT by injection, not recreational. It's not. Even crystal DMT can't do it. It's injunctions in hospitals that they use in English-speaking countries. An injection, it's over. You will never again believe yourself to be an individual, never again a person, and never again will you have any depression. But then why don't we use this too? But because they will never, ever agree to free people. I told you, even with pulse magnetic fields, at the level of the skull, with magnetic pulse coils, you look on the internet, the helmet, K-Thigh, it is called, which was created by Michael Passenger, in Canada, is on sale over the counter. It costs €180, but you will never hear about it. I'll put 2 electromagnetic induction coils in there. I'll put you in the absolute right away. Just as Salvia Divinum or other thegans do, except that here. Does that have anything to do with the technique, Kes, there? With the technique, Kes? Oh no, nothing to see, Kes, it's a total scam. That said, it works, because I have. Yes, but it has nothing to do with free energy. But it doesn't last long. No, it won't work, it won't work. The only way to find free energy is zero time. It is the reservoir, the absolute is the reservoir of love, the reservoir of manifestation, the reservoir of dream, the reservoir of life, the support of life. And finding the origin is that. That's what sets you free. So where did the DMT come from? Where did it come from? Well, you have it in the fungus called psilocybe, in rhizomes, for example, called magic truffle. You have DMT in low doses. So low-dose DMT, you know, people who like mushrooms well, it creates brain cleaning. There is that, when you take DMT even non-injectable, for several months, you'll have a totally clear mind, everything is lucid, everything is clear. you really feel like your head has been cleaned, you have a perfectly empty screen, and there are no more parasitic thoughts, emotions, memories, but it doesn't last. A reset. Ah, there you go, unlike the one who, but it doesn't last. On the other hand, injectable DMT, but in hospitals, and again, in some experiments, you have a book called The DMT Molecule of the Mind that was written by an American, that perfectly explains the work that has been done at the pharmacological level, but it never fails. That is, an injection of DMT of the dose of 1 microgram/kilogram, I think, or 1 milligram, I don't remember, well, whatever, it's a very low dose, stops all depressions instantly. But it also puts an end to the idea of believing oneself a person, that is, at that moment, you reverse the relationship of the punishment and reward circuit by the DMT. But, once again, Australians and Canadians do this with electromagnetic inductions based on hic and nuncs, there, on these points, on what they call the cortex without, attiva motor, and the language area, which are the access points to multidimensionality, there is no other. We create this with the strength of our wrists, so, the advantage too is that, regardless of the channelings, everything we say and others, indeed, whales and in particular whales, when you see them, it takes you into what I have called something huge and vast, that frees you from the person. This was not the case before, since all the people who met the whales in previous years, they suffered, because there was a tear, a suffering. Those who met the whales 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it dragged them into the depressions themselves, because there was a lack afterwards. Today, you'll see tomorrow, even if there are no whales, with pilot whales, it already creates a state of freedom because it is the information of zero time, what cetaceans convey, what Faham said each time, they are the carriers of the dream. They were with the origin of the dream, they will be at the end of the dream. Afterwards, I saw a big dolphin that came to visit me, talk to me, so the bottlenose dolphins that come to talk to you, that stand in the air, usually copper-skinned, then they are 2 meters 40, but they stand up. So I don't see them, but they talk to me from behind, what, no, they really existed, that's what we called the Great Mothers, who accompanied Cyrus geneticist mothers, it was the copper-skinned dolphins that moved upright, that measured 2 meters 40, that stood in the air, not in the water. Mine, his name is Atka, he came to see me in Polynesia, yes, Faham, there are more and more brothers and sisters who live the presence, in their hearts, of fame. Tomorrow this will be the case, since I have announced, in addition there is no live broadcast, that the images will be broadcast on a deferred basis. But I have announced contact with Faham tomorrow from 9 to noon. You'll see what happens to people, even to be informed, since there will be no image or sound, I will broadcast the videos afterwards, you'll see what will happen. It's obvious. Because Faham is present in everyone, and it is Faham who takes us out of our dreams. When I say Faham, it was the people of the cetaceans who created the dream and one of the great mothers and geneticist mothers. The great mothers were before the geneticist mothers, it was the famous dolphins that walked in the air. It is among the first forms, once anthropomorphism is born, through the form developers, you know that we are talking about the thought adjuster, these are the ekans, the one who controls your thoughts. But so when you hear about thought adjusters in your antia, it's kaput, what? Of course, I'm talking about the shape adjuster, the shape adjusters, that's what predates the organization of the worlds, that's the civilization of the triangles, that's what Pepper calls the Hayat HaKadosh or the Kredwins if you will, it's the same thing, but the shape designers have maintained a cohesion of the dream, through the organs, the fact that we have a body that doesn't leave in 1,000 pieces, it's linked to gravitation, it's linked to electromagnetism. So the universe is electric, it's quite real, we had absolutely amazing experiments 30 years ago in EDF's central laboratory, where simply by sending an electric arc on a copper plate at a precise angle, well, when the electric arc touched the copper plate, it drew the shape of man. It's written in the electron. There is only one particle in the universe, and we are all that unique particle, simply it has traveled all paths, and every time we have crossed again, we have created another force. These forces, but intercrossing and recrossing each other, have created forms, and we believe in this form, here as in any world. But in fact, there is only one particle. So the return to unity, there is only one, we speak of unity, a single heart, a single consciousness, but in the end, there has never existed this particle, it is an accident. We're in a nightmare. Come on, let's take a break, give each other half an hour, and I'll pick it up at 6:30. Through Jean-Luc Young. The Transformations. English translation, LMF.